The trumpets have stopped. The legions have won. But for the survivors, the real work is just beginning. A centurion looks over his century. He doesn't see a victory, he sees a massive logistical problem. How do you move 10,000 bodies before the plague starts? The answer lies in Roman discipline. First came the mercy killers. Units tasked with clearing the field of those too wounded to survive. It was a cold, professional necessity. A wounded enemy was a hidden dagger, and a wounded Roman was a burden. Next came the accounting. Rome was a bureaucracy that loved lists even in the middle of a bloodbath. Soldiers identified their brothers by their tesserae, lead identity discs. No man was left unaccounted for. The cleaners then stripped the field. Red shields, bronze helmets, and iron mail were gathered like a harvest. Then came the most dangerous enemy of all, infection. Thousands of tons of flesh had to be moved before dusk. While the dead were sorted, the wounded were rushed to the valetudinarium, the field hospital. Here, Roman medicine was at its peak. They knew that a clean cut was the difference between life and a rotting death. Every man had a job. The legion was an ecosystem designed to erase the evidence of its own violence. And then, the fire. Massive funeral pyres were lit for the Roman dead, a holy necessity for their souls. To die without a burial was the greatest fear of a Roman. The cleanup was their final act of brotherhood. But while the Romans burned their own, the enemy's fate was much darker. And far more industrial. For the enemy, there were no pyres. Only the cold, dark silence of the corpse pits. Roman engineers treated the dead like a landscape project. Surveying tools were used even for graves. Sometimes, they were left where they fell. A tactic called terror fati, a warning to those still behind the walls. Before the burial came the harvest. Iron was expensive, and a battlefield was a literal gold mine. Helmets, mail, and even silver-studded belts were stripped. The enemy dead were recycled back into the Roman treasury. Damaged blades were sent to the forges. Roman blacksmiths worked through the night to reshape the tools of war. A bent blade was just metal. To a Roman, it was an asset to be recovered. But some items were considered cursed. These were broken and dedicated to the gods of the underworld. At the center of it all, they built the Tropaeum. A monument of arms captured from the enemy commander. It stood as a silent, metallic ghost, a warning that the legions had been here, and they had won. By dawn, the chaos was gone. In its place was a landscape of Roman order. The pits were covered, the iron was stacked, and the blood was beginning to sink into the soil. But the physical cleanup was only half the battle. For the medics, the hardest work was just beginning. They had to keep thousands of survivors alive in a world without antibiotics. It was a race against the infection. And as the legions prepared to move on, the real scavengers of the ancient world arrived. After the iron was harvested, a small loot began. Personal trophies that boosted a soldier's morale. But Rome was a system of laws. Individual greed was a crime, the collective loot belonged to the state. Every coin was accounted for. The battlefield was a massive transfer of wealth from the conquered to the conqueror. While the dead were looted, the wounded were a race against time. The valetudinarium was the legion's heart. They used vinegar, a primitive but effective antiseptic, to clean wounds before infection could take root. Specialized forceps were used to extract arrowheads. Roman medicine was a cleanup of the living. A veteran soldier was more valuable than 10 recruits. To save a life was to save a piece of the legion's power. But the cleanup wasn't just human. Thousands of fallen animals were a biological ticking time bomb. Nothing went to waste. Hides were salvaged for leather, hair for ropes. The legion was an ecosystem. Dead remains were moved away from water sources. The Romans knew that the water was as deadly as any sword. By midday, the air was a thick cocktail of vinegar, blood, and the smoke of 1,000 cooking fires. The chaos of slaughter had been organized into an industrial zone. The centurions finally took a moment to breathe. Every weapon was sharpened. Every shield was repainted. The cleanup was a preparation for the next battle. The battlefield was no longer a place of death, but a place of work. A clean slate for the Roman future. But as the sun set, the psychological cost began to surface. You can clean a field, but you can't clean a memory. After the field was cleared, the soldiers faced a different kind of cleanup, the purification of the soul. They called it lustratio. A religious reset designed to sweep away the pollution of death. Without these rituals, they believed the ghosts of the slain would haunt the legions every step. While the soul was cleaned, the engineers finished the final erasure. Everything not worth saving was burned. The goal was a sterile monument. They left no scraps for the enemy to scavenge. In cases of ultimate victory, they sowed salt into the earth. A symbolic act to ensure nothing would ever grow there again. Then came the order, pack and move. The industrial zone was folded into a column of iron. The mobile hospitals were loaded. The survivors were now a part of the baggage train. The forges were extinguished. The tools were packed. The machine was ready for the next horizon. As the centurion looked back, he saw a field that no longer looked like a graveyard. Weeks later, a traveler might see only a peaceful meadow. But beneath the grass lay an industrial secret. Massive trenches of iron and bone. The biological engine of Roman victory. The Romans didn't just win wars with the gladius. They won them with the shovel and the ledger. They turned a nightmare into a ledger, and a bloodbath into a clean slate. Because for Rome, every end was simply a more efficient beginning. For centuries, the Roman cleanup was so effective that the battlefield simply vanished. Until the soil began to speak. In places like the Teutoburg forest, we found the fingerprints of the legion. Tiny fragments, sandal studs, iron hinges, allow us to map the exact flow of the cleanup operation. A Roman soldier would lose a single nail from his boot. 2,000 years later, it tells us where he stood. They missed nothing. What we find today are the scraps they deemed too small to recycle. 6 years after the disaster, General Germanicus returned. His task? A secondary cleanup. He found the bleached bones of 3 legions. The cleanup now became a ritual of recovery. The bones weren't just buried, they were organized. The Roman machine was back to finish the job. The cleanup was an eternal commitment. A legionary belonged to Rome, even after the flesh had failed. We find lead sling bullets, cast in a hurry. Each one is a data point in a cleanup that took days. Using LiDAR and 3D scans, we can see the ghost forges, the heat signatures left in the clay. We can see where the piles of iron were stacked. The organization was absolute. By the time Germanicus left, the cleanup had turned a massacre into a monument. But the Romans didn't just bury bones. They buried secrets. Items that were never meant to be found. Next, we look at the cleanup of the living, the brutal, advanced science of the Roman field hospital. The cleanup of the living was a site of high-precision repair. The valetudinarium was light years ahead of its time. They understood debridement, the removal of war's debris. Iron splinters and dirt had to be extracted before the rot set in. Every bit of wood and iron was a potential death sentence. The Roman cleanup was a race against infection. They used a pre-scientific form of sterilization. Boiling water and wine-soaked linens kept the black rot at bay. Speed was the ultimate medicine. A surgeon had to be faster than the patient's fear. Amputation was the final act of cleanup. For a limb crushed by a mace, it was the only way to save the man. They could remove a limb in under a minute. The biological machine had to be kept from bleeding out. They used cautery, sealing the blood vessels with fire. It was brutal, but it worked. This was a different kind of scavenger hunt, one for survival. A soldier saved was a legion restored. When the legion moved on, they left a signature, discarded jars of honey, wine, and medicine. The Romans didn't just clean the field, they cleaned the soldier, ensuring the engine of empire remained at peak efficiency. Modern scholars are stunned by the quality of these tools. They were designed for ergonomics and portability. The Romans treated surgery with the same cold, industrial logic as they treated bridge building. By the time the camp was empty, the cleanup was complete. Every life saved was a victory for Rome. But what happened to the iron? The millions of tons of scrap metal left behind by the dying? To the Romans, a battlefield wasn't a graveyard, it was a gold mine of strategic metal. Leaving iron behind was unthinkable. It was handing the enemy the raw materials to rebuild. Everything was sorted. Reparable gear went to the engineers, the rest went to the fire. The Fabri, the legion's engineers, could fix a breastplate while the blood on it was still fresh. Metal too damaged to save was melted down into ingots. The blood iron was reborn. This industrial recycling meant that every victory literally paid for the next one. High-quality gear was created and sent back to provincial capitals. This was the spoil. Long columns of wagons carried the harvested iron. Rome's economy was fueled by the debris of her enemies. Every Roman victory was an economic engine. Waste was the only thing the legions couldn't afford. By the time they were finished, the field was stripped so clean that even the earth seemed to forget. Modern metal detectors often find nothing. The Romans were the ultimate recyclers. But occasionally, they missed a piece. A single spearhead buried deep, holding the secret of a 1,000-man cleanup. The iron of the enemy became the nails of a new Roman bridge. The swords of the vanquished became the plows of the victor. Roman power was built on this cycle. Destruction. Cleanup. Reconstruction. The cleanup was done. The ledger was closed. Until the next trumpet sounded. Behind the steel of the legion followed a shadow army, the Lixi. The vultures of the Roman world. To them, an enemy who survived was a living asset. A cleanup of a different kind. Slave traders followed the legions with silver in hand, buying the survivors directly from the soldiers. The cleanup of a battlefield was often the largest human trafficking event in the ancient world. Soldiers traded captured jewelry for wine and quick cash. The battlefield was a dark marketplace. Captured horses were rounded up and sold. No living creature was left without a price tag. The centurions allowed the trade, it kept the men happy and the army mobile. They collected the mundane, the clothes of the dead, the tattered leather, the broken timber. This was the vulture economy. A symbiotic relationship between slaughter and disposal. The legion provided the slaughter, the followers provided the profit. By the time the caravans moved on, the field was truly empty. The cleanup was absolute. Historians often ignore the followers, but without them, the Roman army couldn't have moved with such speed. The cleanup of a battlefield wasn't just about hygiene, it was about turning a culture into a currency. The machine was clean. The ledger was empty. The next slaughter was already being calculated. Next, we reveal the ultimate secret, how the Romans used cleanups as a weapon of war itself. The cleanup wasn't just a chore. It was a weapon of deception. The ghost cleanup was designed to make the legions look immortal. No bodies, no blood, no weakness. An enemy scout returns to find his victims have vanished. To him, the Romans are no longer men, but ghosts. But when they wanted to break a soul, the Romans practiced theatrical dread. This wasn't cruelty. It was a calculated milestone of fear. Even the tropaeum was a trap. A golden prize left as bait for the grieving. As the enemy moved to reclaim their honor, they realized the cleanup had only just begun. They turned mourning into an ambush. The Roman machine was always watching. The earth itself was modified. The cleanup was a reconfiguration of the world. Rome didn't just erase the dead. They conquered the memory of the living. Where there was a massacre, now there was only a road. A clean, Roman road. Their speed was their terror. They arrived as a storm, and they left as a silence. In the end, the cleanup was so perfect that it created a lie. A lie of an empire without blood. But archaeology finds the truth. The Roman cleanup was the final, most brutal act of the battle. They didn't just win. They made it look like they had already won before the first sword was drawn. The Roman cleanup was the ultimate expression of their soul. They mastered the landscape of their own violence. They turned raw, bloody chaos into a structured, Roman reality. Today, we walk across these secrets every day. The iron in our soil was once the iron of their enemies. The way an army cleans up says more about its power than the way it fights. In the end, the cleanup was the final victory. They conquered the evidence of resistance. Their greatest secret wasn't a weapon. It was the shovel, the ledger, and the discipline of the clean slate. Battlefield Secrets: How the Romans Cleaned Up. Written and produced for a global audience. Sources include Vegetius, Polybius, and modern findings from the Cochranes Museum. Next time, Roman Siege Secrets. The industrial science of the wall breakers. Subscribe to uncover the hidden logistics of history. Was the cleanup their greatest victory? Join the discussion in the comments below. Good night. A Hathan production. http://hathanyoutube.vn